Welcome to our first event back in person. It is so good to see all of your faces. We should clap for ourselves. I am Zinat Rahman. I'm the executive director of the Institute of Politics. And what an event we have tonight. It's going to break records for the most people on stage, if nothing else. But so excited that you're with us. Wanted to tell you about a few upcoming events. We have an event this coming Tuesday on U.S. policy and the southern border. And then on Thursday, I will be doing a conversation and celebration of Black History Month with Angela Glover Blackwell. And on the 22nd, we're having a program that is with Illinois Black leaders in government, and that will be in person. And so if you want to hear about and get any more details about any of that stuff, please sign up for our newsletter. I would like to, for formal introductions of the panel, introduce Elizabeth Snyder. Elizabeth's a first year in law, letters, and society and public policy. And this past year, she worked for Terry McAuliffe's campaign, and I understand you wrote a few speeches too. So please welcome Elizabeth.
Thank you, and welcome to the UChicago IOP's first in-person speaker series event of the quarter. The title of tonight's event is Yes, We Can, The Legacy of the Obama Campaign. February 10th, 2007 completely changed the course of American politics. It was the day when Illinois Senator Barack Obama formally announced his candidacy for President of the United States. As he gained momentum, winning the Iowa caucuses, the Democratic nomination, and then the presidency, his campaign came to be viewed by millions of Americans as a movement that reached far beyond politics and provided hope that government could be better. Now, 15 years later, we are lucky enough to be joined by alums of Obama's 2008 campaign to relive that historic day, discuss the campaign's legacy, and reflect on our nation's politics today. We're joined by David Axelrod, who is the campaign's chief strategist and now serves as our beloved director of the UChicago IOP and a senior commentator for CNN. We're also joined by Jon Favreau, who is Obama's head speechwriter, and he is now the co-host of the podcast Pod Save America and a co-founder of Crooked Media. We're also joined by Robert Gibbs, who is the Obama campaign's communications chief and then President Obama's White House press secretary. We're also joined by Reggie Love, who is Obama's personal assistant, and as I understand, played basketball with him every day there was a primary. Yeah. Okay. And we're also joined by Alyssa Mastromonaco, who served as the director of scheduling and advance for the campaign, and then later served as the deputy chief of staff for operations at the White House, the youngest woman to serve in that position. And last but not least, we're joined by the manager of Obama's 2008 campaign, David Plouffe. Obama said in his victory speech that Plouffe built the best political campaign in the history of the United States, but it certainly wouldn't have been possible without the rest of the staff and the candidate himself. Moderating tonight's program is Jeff Seleni, the chief national affairs correspondent for CNN. During his career, he was the senior Washington correspondent for ABC News and also won a Pulitzer Prize with the Chicago Tribune. On this day in 2007, he was in Springfield for Obama's campaign announcement reporting for the New York Times. 15 years after Obama announced his campaign, our political landscape looks quite different. But tonight, the architects of that campaign will bring us back to the movement of hope that Americans felt on February 10th, 2007, as we seek to renew that hope in our politics today. So join me in welcoming our panel.
Before you start talking, can I just say, if any of you have grievances about Plouffe, let's get him out now before he shows up.
He managed to win a presidential campaign, but not get there through traffic. So.
If Alyssa were in charge, he would be here.
I mean, I'm just saying. He'll hear about it when he gets here.
Well, that was his mantra, never seen, always heard.
We'll save the Plouffe line of questioning for a minute, but since this is 15 years later, we're talking about the speech. let's start with the speech and get a sense of what that day was like. It was a Saturday in Springfield, so let's roll a little bit of that tape.
With sound, too, would be good.
This is what all of Favreau's speeches sound like.
But once we get the sound working, I actually remember standing pretty close
Favreau,
to
by the way, always
We were
likes
next to
this.
each other.
and he was mouthing the words.
Yeah, that's right.
So you could probably do your best Barack Obama imitation.
Right.
here.
No, I will not try that.
Let's re-rack it and see if we can get.
No, this is
that on video.
this is the way Favreau likes it, where you can read the words. and
That's,
you don't have to
enough of the
hear the
speaking
actual
stuff.
candidate.
The words.
Yeah.
But of course, this, as we get this going, of course, this was in Springfield, done for a reason, because
Yeah.
of Abraham Lincoln, of course. And as we get the video going, if we do, if not, John's
is
very
the-
familiar with the speech, since
And
he
with Lincoln.
actually, since he was there for both speeches. John, talk to us about your favorite lines from that, your etch-in-stone lines from that speech. And you were standing in the back shivering like everyone. And what were you thinking in that moment as he was suddenly on this stage reading your words and his?
Jeff, it's so funny that you just asked me that question, because it is a question you asked me 15 years ago as you were standing next to me during the speech. And
He's hoping for a better answer.
But his pen froze, so he never got your quote down.
Jeff would always reach out to me. He was like, you were the one journalist who always asked me, what's the etch in stone line of this speech? And I'd be like, shit, I don't have it. No, I think, I was just talking to some students about this. This speech, because it reminds me of sort of politics today.
Oh, wait.
There we go.
Wait, maybe we start from the beginning. Oh.
Stretching out before us. If you sense, as I sense, that the time is now to shake off our slumber and slough off our fears and make good on the debt we owe past and future generations, then I am ready to take up the cause and march with you and work with you. Today, together, we can finish the work that needs to be done and usher in a new birth of freedom on this earth. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's get to work.
Actually, that's actually the end of the speech.
That is the end of the speech.
And the clip that we wanted to play was his actual announcement that he was running and talking about this moment in the country. But I think you were about to get to that.
Well, I was actually, towards the end of the speech, there's this paragraph that I remember we talked about later in the speech writing process, where he said, this campaign can't be about me. It has to be about us. It has to be about what we can do together, about reclaiming a sense of common purpose, reclaiming a sense of citizenship. And, I do think that was sort of the essence of the movement part of the campaign, which was so important, which was like, for all of Obama's talent, like, what he was trying to say throughout that whole campaign is, this is not something that I can do alone. This is not something that any one president can do alone, or any one politician, no matter how good they are. And this needs to be a movement, and this needs to be about reclaiming your own democracy. And I think that was maybe one of the most important messages, even though it can be hard to hear.
Well,
Since we know how the movie ended, obviously, let's go to how it began. And David, obviously, he's in Springfield, in Illinois, where you spent so much time, where he was a state senator. You, in this moment, were thinking, he's really going to do this.
The essential decency of the American people. Where I came to believe that through this decency,
Let's listen.
we can build a more hopeful America. And that is why, in the shadow of the old state capitol, where Lincoln once called on a house divided to stand together, where common hopes and common dreams still live, I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America. If you feel destiny calling and see as I...
My goodness. I still hear that guy's voice in my head. This is all these years later.
But when he said those words, what were you thinking then?
Well, partly I was thinking that I couldn't feel my toes, because it was 12 degrees, felt like 7 degrees. But in a sense, you look at that picture, and you have this plaza filled with people who came out on a day when it was near zero, and waited for a long time. Alyssa will tell the story, I'm sure, about all the drama that went on beforehand, because there were great concerns about freezing our supporters to death, and particularly their children. Yeah, it was a bit surreal, because look, this was 2007. 3 years. Is Pluff there?
He's here.
Yeah.
He's here.
He wants the big. Do not give him applause, because it will just encourage him.
They're miking him up. You got a few minutes.
But just 3 years earlier, he was a state senator running for the U.S. Senate. He hadn't even won the primary for the U.S. Senate 3 years earlier. So, but it underscores just how audacious it really was. I mean, everybody now says, well, Barack Obama, he was a juggernaut and all of that stuff. Pluff, are you wired up?
Wired up, yes.
Well, come on.
Let's go.
Are you fired up?
I'm ready to go, Gibbs.
Gentlemen, David Pluff.
See, he dressed casual too.
You look at it now and you say, well, of course this was a juggernaut, and this was the beginning of the juggernaut. There was a certain element of insanity to this, because when we started this campaign, a bunch of these people were in the room, but there were 8 people in the room. And we had no money, no organization. And 2 months later, we have this announcement in freezing temperatures, and there's almost 20,000 people. And so I was struck by that as well, that not only how improbable it was that he could do it, but man, maybe we could do it.
Yeah. And he looked like a winner that day.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, Robert, you spent so much time, obviously, in the run-up to that. Was he a winner that day, or was that part of the optics? It was important to have a big entry into the race to make him seem perhaps a little bit bigger than he was.
Well, I'm not sure Mother Nature cooperated with us thinking we could get 20,000 people out, because as David said, it was otherworldly cold. I do think all of us, just to your last question, I think all of us, because we'd been part of this journey for some period of time, probably spent each part of that speech as kind of pinching ourselves like, wow, we're here, we're with all these 20,000 people. And then we spend part of the time thinking, okay, is he on the right? Is he doing this well? Is the prompter working? And you're thinking through the technical part of it. I do think, to underscore a little bit about what David said, we had to get everything right that day because we were the insurrection campaign. And,
tough word to use these days.
Yeah. But if we, if something wouldn't have worked, if the temperatures had prevented us from having a big crowd, I think we had to bat 1,000 that day. And, we can all tell stories of things that many of you never saw that didn't go well that day.
Go ahead.
But I do think we were judged, and we realized we were going to be judged very early on by could we pull off that first day? Could we pull off an announcement? Could we pull off a trip later to Iowa? We were filming 60 Minutes during all this stuff. So could we put all of that together, and could political reporters like you conceive that a group like this and a candidate like that could actually do this?
And until we figured out that simple bribery would do.
Those were the days. No, but Alyssa Mastromonica, who everyone knew at the time, was largely responsible for the trains running on time and running at all that day. You'd been involved in the 2004 campaign and the Kerry campaign, but this was something different. You had worked for Senator Obama, and now this presidential campaign. When Pluff told you that, when you guys talked about this Springfield announcement, is this what you envisioned? And during those moments, what were you thinking? And how did you convince Michelle Obama to allow this to happen outside?
Wow, Jeff. It is how I envisioned it. I mean, I think that we always felt that we just had to come out of the gate really strong and impressive and exciting. And, if Secretary, then Senator Clinton was going to run. I knew her team. I knew what her event would look like. And so when I went to Pluff and was like, this is how much I think it's going to cost, he's like, you can do it for less. And I was like, look like a winner. They'll think we're winners. And so, we always knew, I think actually President Obama knew that this was the exact right spot to do the event. But my favorite part is, so as we said, like, I think when people think of us now, they're like, oh, the Obama people, and it's like, no, we didn't have a credit card. We didn't have staff. Everything that we did that day were people who believed in us, which I think is underappreciated now. But when we went down and the team had started building the site, Senator Obama was on his way down, and I was so nervous. I didn't sleep or eat or anything. I actually kind of dressed like I did that day. These guys are all posh and fancy now, but this is how I was.
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty much how Pluff was too. And when the stage was being built, I went out to see it, and I became like so overwhelmed with emotion because on the Kerry campaign, we did do these big, huge events, and sometimes they don't come together. And so I could see how this event could be awesome, and we were there. I think it was the first time we used the City of Blinding Lights as our music, cued to Second 38, which if you go back and listen, you'll be like, of course, that's where it had to be. But when Senator Obama came, I was so nervous and so scared, and he has a real way of just diffusing those moments when he was like, Alyssa, the stage isn't gonna like collapse on me, is it? And I was like, oh my God, imagine if that happened. But it didn't. I mean, I think that we always had a pretty good sense of like the crowd and what it would look like if it came together, but until that day, until I got to the site at 4 o'clock in the morning, these guys are complaining about cold. They weren't there at 4 o'clock in the morning. And you saw the flags, and you saw that this like ragtag team of people whose only common denominator was that they believed in Barack Obama and were gonna do their best came together. I always have to go back and watch the speech because I don't remember a single minute of it because I was literally like, please, dear God, let us not let the stage crumble. But as Jeff mentioned, it was very cold, and the president is not, though from Chicago, raised in Hawaii, not a fan of the cold. So you'll hear it here first. If you actually look closely at the speech, there is a heater built into the podium. So when you hear him complain about how cold it is, please just roll your eyes because we're just glad the podium didn't catch fire. That is a testament to the advanced team.
A detail of which actually ended up in a Maureen Dowd column, which further angered him at the New York Times at that point. But Pluff,
he certainly got hot then.
He did. Yeah. But Pluff, since you're here, I mean, this was just the easy part. In some respects. After this, he flew to Iowa, Cedar Rapids, and then Waterloo for a couple days. But I want to go back right before this. You wrote something in your book. In the dark recesses of our minds, we knew Hillary Clinton would likely be the nominee as they were talking about running. So for you, what kind of a moment was this?
You never told us.
And at that point, were you convinced he could do it? Or what did this speech do for you in terms of your confidence level in him?
It increased my confidence level mildly. I mean, it all sounds like we're saying
which is
this
a lot
now.
for Trump.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's a big.
I mean, no. I mean, listen, the Hillary Clinton of 2007 was so much stronger than the Hillary Clinton of 2016. I mean, I think we were just trying to do one thing at a time, have a good announcement. We went to Iowa, did not have a really good, had huge crowds. He was terrible in Iowa. And took him months, actually, till he kind of felt, I think, got his grounding. So,
Almost a full year.
It gave me confidence in the team. As Alyssa said, it was a ragtag. I don't think any of us were necessarily conventional first-round draft picks. I mean, Axe might have been late round, but they didn't think it was. He was no Mark Penn, to you political reporters.
Thank you.
And so, we could do that. We could hire a good team and begin to. The thing we had in the very beginning was volunteers who came to us online for the most part, and a lot of amazing young people who wanted to work for them. And so that part was going well. But no, I think it wasn't really until I think deep into 2007 that we really begun to think that maybe we had a pathway here, and it was even narrow then. Like, this is not us trying to be humble. Like, we all thought we were signing up for a year.
Yeah.
And we'd do as good as we could and work for somebody we believed in a campaign that was fueled by the grassroots, probably the first one since Bobby Kennedy on the Democratic side, and that was going to be a great experience for all of us. But it was a magical day because he showed some promise, the team showed the promise. But as you know, Jeff, you covered him. I mean, there were some days in Iowa and New Hampshire where he was the furthest thing from a president that you could imagine. And that's just the trials. Axe would talk to him all the time, like, this is going to be harder than you think. And it was. And the nice thing is, you know, the organization carried him for parts of the campaign. He carried us for parts of the campaign. And then at some point it kind of merged and we were both operating at a high level of efficiency.
I think some of his rivals at the time, including the person who's president now, told him he was not presidential and ready to be president then in some of those debates in 2007. So that, I think that underscores the point that David was talking about. This is not a straight line.
Just to underscore something, though, we all had to sign one-year apartment leases.
Yeah.
Thinking, what happens if we're out of this thing in 9 months? I got a house and an apartment and a
Gibbs, you
government
gave me 2 weeks to get to Chicago. I was in the Senate office. I don't know what's going on. I hear there's a presidential campaign. You're like, hey, could you be in Chicago in 2 weeks? I'm like, for what? For like an event? He's like, no, for your life.
But the good news is I gave you 2 extra weeks on your lease. You were later.
I just want to say, you know, I think you're underrating the quality of, you know, yes, there were a lot of young, green people, but there were people, Paul Tooze and Steve Hildebrand, and people who were really experienced. You know, Gibbs himself, Alyssa, veterans of presidential campaigns. And the thing that always impressed me was that we were able to get people to come and do this, knowing that they were going to basically banish themselves from democratic politics if we failed, because you know, we were running against the franchise. And if we failed, they were not that forgiving. So everybody knew that, and then people said, count me in. I always joke that it was like Ocean's 11. We could go around, because we had nobody. We could just go around and put the team together. And we put a team together of people who are highly motivated, not just by the sport of it, but because they actually believed in it. And that made it a really special thing. Right. But nobody bore the brunt, Jeff, of Obama's realization about how shitty it is to run for president at times than Reggie Love, who was with him.
Which is exactly what I was going to ask you.
At every moment.
I mean,
just trying to help you.
This was a joyful day for all of the staff and the supporters. It was, you know, the applause certainly rang out. But Reggie, you were there when days were not quite as joyful. And Pluff recounted this in his book, talking about a moment that Robert had with the senator. He asked him if he was having any fun, and Senator Obama said no. And Reggie, what did you say?
Yeah, no, look, I got to say, so, you know, I was really young at the time. I was like 23. And I also played Duke football. No one's ever heard of it. Like, we lost all the time. But we all, you know, got up and did the work and prepared to compete every week. And so I can remember that day. We had left Florida. We were flying back to Illinois. And he goes, you know, I miss my family. I miss my wife. I'm tired. Like, this is not fun. And I'd said to him, I said, well, you know, sir, if it's any consolation, I'm having the time of my life.
And was it any consolation?
No, we should set the story. We should set the story up a little bit, because Puff alluded to it. I mean, and you could see this in the second day of the campaign. He gets up to give a speech, and it's sort of what is going to be or what will become his stump speech, but he's never really given that before. And there's not a, hey, you can't go the second day and say, I'm running for president of, you know, it's sort of, that's been done. So he starts to get into this, and Pluff Axe and I are in the campaign headquarters, and somebody had recorded one of the events. And we watched it, and we were all like, holy shit. He's terrible.
But accurate.
They're all calling their rental agents saying, is there any wiggle room in that lease?
12-month lease? No. And so it was, I mean, and you could just tell he was, part of it too, he was struggling with, you know, he'd just given an announcement speech in front of 20,000 people. His other big speech was on a world platform that catapulted him. And people came and expected they were going to see one of those two speeches while he answered a question about ethanol subsidies in Cedar Rapids.
Yeah.
But also he wanted to, Hillary Clinton was in his head.
Oh, absolutely.
And she was the more experienced one, and she's super smart and brilliant on policy. And so he thought at the beginning, I'm going to prove to everyone that I'm just as smart as her, so I can give really long answers on policy.
So these answers were
impress you all.
really bad, and
But accurate.
yeah, and so Pluff says to Axum, he says, all right, you guys got to go out and just see if there's something structural, see if there's something about the way we've set up his day, just figure out if there's something that we can do to help him get better. And I took the first week. I don't think Axe ever took a full week the rest of the campaign. That was my but I remember we're flying and Pluff had said, look, you got to talk to him about just where his head is. And I could tell leading up to that flight, I hadn't seen him regularly for a while, and he was almost like he wanted to talk. He wanted to talk. And I could tell something was going on. So we get on the plane. I'm, of course, flying sitting backward. I don't like to fly at that point, as Axe used to taunt me. And I'm flying backwards on the way to Iowa, and I figure, you know what? I need to have this conversation at the beginning of this flight. If somebody falls asleep or we have dinner or something and then we land and I hadn't had this conversation, I don't want to call Pluff and say, we didn't get to it. So I'm looking, and I'm looking at him, and Reggie is sitting there. And that's what I said to him. I'm like, I thought, let's clear the air. Are you having any fun? And that's when he went to, none, no, not at all. And I can't underscore the glee on Reggie's face. It was almost as if he slapped him on the back, like, I'm having the time of my, and it was just, I look at Reggie and I'm like, Reggie.
Not helpful.
I'm trying to have and it was just very, but it was this, it really, I mean, he was, and to John's point, it did take him a while. It wasn't fun, it's laborious. Like I said, you've got to perform 6 or 7 times a day. You've got to be great 6 or 7 times a day. And look, you're graded in a sense because, Pluff's checking the numbers, and how many people signed supporter cards? How many people want more information? How many people signed up to knock on doors? So all those, all these metrics are part of, as Jeff said, we land in Iowa. That's, it was not subtle that we were going to Iowa, right? We were placing a large strategic bet, and it took a while to get him comfortable.
Yeah. We should point out he went in, I guess, late February, was it, the debate or the healthcare forum
SEIU
in Vegas,
in
right?
Vegas,
Yeah.
and this was on healthcare, and Hillary Clinton had like a PhD in this, yeah, and John Edwards had spent a lot of time on this because he wanted to run he wanted to be the leftist guy on healthcare, and Obama really wasn't prepared for the debate at that level. And he came back and he said, she looked like a president, and I didn't look like a president that day. But he also said, I'm not a good candidate right now, but give me some time. I will be a good candidate. I will figure this out, which is sort of his makeup. He kind of figures, I can figure this out. And by the summer, really, it was really around the 4th of July that he started really putting the thing together. But yeah, he was.
And to John's point,
obviously fundraising though was going along gangbusters. So there were other metrics. The organization was, was definitely keeping him in the game and making the Clinton campaign worried. But David, one thing before we get away from the announcement, one person, as it turns out, who was not there that day was Rev Jeremiah Wright. And
he was there, just not on the platform.
Well, he was not giving the invocation to this crowd. But the 20,000 people had no idea he was there, is my point.
Yes.
He didn't have a public role.
Yes.
And that changed in the hours leading up to the announcement because of the Rolling Stone article. Tell us about what led to that and how difficult of a conversation that was.
Well, we're driving down to Springfield. We're in one van. Were you in that van? And so Pluff and Gibbs and you were down there freezing already. Yeah, thank you.
Alyssa and I flew together.
Yeah. We were together.
Alyssa was supervising the distribution of 20,000 hand warmers.
Yes.
That was part of the agreement with Mrs. Obama to allow us to do it outside. But we're riding down, and this article appears in Rolling Stone, and I forget. I mean, obviously it was online somewhere, and it was a story about Reverend Wright's. The reporter went and sat in and heard a sermon, and the sermon was provocative, and in a way that you could just see the Fox News story.
They actually did run it about a year later.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there were other sermons, it turns out. But
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, but you know, our concern and my concern was we don't want our day to be defined by this. And Reverend Wright was scheduled to give the invocation at the event. And we consulted, and I called Senator Obama, and I said, you know, we've got this concern. We don't think he should appear because you can see what people will do with this. And there was always throughout the campaign an effort to try and tie him to, through Reverend Wright, through a caricature of Michelle, but to try and make him a scary African-American guy, a scary black guy, you know, radical, extreme. And so we said, you know, he really can't go on the platform.
What did he say?
He was uncomfortable because this was his pastor, and he didn't want to deliver that news. But you know, he's also rational, and he understood the argument we were making. There were discussions back and forth between the assistant pastor there, and then you know, ultimately he spoke to Reverend Wright and explained that he really wanted him to be on the platform, but his advisors thought it was a bad idea, and Reverend Wright didn't go on, and it really was a source of friction between them. It did prompt me to say to our research people that I would like to see the other sermons that Reverend Wright had given, and they were all, turns out, for sale in the gift shop at the church. 30 years of sermons. Our folks never got to it, but 6 months later I learned that other campaigns apparently had, because a mash tape of the most provocative and many out-of-context quotes from Reverend Wright found its way onto national television, and that became the reason that the president ended up giving this very, very historic speech on race in Philadelphia, because his campaign was at risk. So, yeah, that was a foreshadowing of things to come.
And David, you also wrote at the time that you were disappointed that more was not done in terms of a research perspective. If those had come out in Iowa, is there any way that he could have won the Iowa caucuses, do you think?
I think so, because we would have had a plan for it. I mean, we were surprised. You never want to be surprised in anything in life, particularly in a presidential campaign. So it would have been an early challenge. There's no doubt that, you know, in part because we were raising a lot of money, but, you know, our polls begin to drift down. I think a lot of you in the media thought, does Obama have it? And so he had some time. He was never off Broadway. He was always on Broadway. But he had some time to work through his stuff, and we did as an organization. But yeah, that was a big failure, which ultimately I have to own that we were surprised by that, because, you know, even though by the time those tapes came out, we were the front runner in the race, it tested us. It took everything we had to keep our footing.
That's one of probably the biggest examples of how the line to the nomination and the presidency was not a straight line. No. It was filled with adversity and challenges.
And Jeff, I mean, I can't describe how exhausting the first 6 weeks were.
Reggie was having a good time.
Yeah.
I was exhausted too, but it was fun.
For different reasons,
Let's not
Reggie.
get into reasons why you were exhausted. But I think it's important because, David, you hit on it. Even when we finally got to the point in December of him essentially saying he was likely to do this, as he and Michelle and the girls were going to Hawaii, there was still he caveated it with all of us, now I could change my mind. And I remember thinking, boy, if he's ever going to change his mind, it's going to be in Hawaii. Literally. And so we didn't have the 2004 campaign. For many of you who were in Illinois, it was, once the primary was done, and I came right after the primary, it was not taxing, to say the least. And so we didn't have a lot of our own self-research. We didn't have a lot of the kind of nuts and bolts, and we were really putting this stuff together. I mean, we joke, when we came back to the headquarters, such as it was at that point, the press office had one phone and 4 people sitting in the room. And I literally, we would say, hey, when you're done, can I got to make a call. And we would pass the phone around. And So all of a sudden, every reporter in the country is fascinated by this biography, and they're descending to look at the years in New York, the years in California, growing up in Hawaii, all this stuff. And I mean, every day, big biography pieces were coming out that were testing our ability to, who's some friends he can talk to and all this other kind of stuff. And I just remember probably the first 6 weeks, just particularly by Friday, we had a Starbucks in the bottom of the building that we were located in.
Dunkin' Donuts too, Favreau.
But I can remember,
that's where Gibbs and I were.
I just remember on Friday afternoon going down and getting coffee like I did every afternoon. And, can you put in like 3 extra shots? And on Friday afternoon, it didn't do a thing. We were so exhausted because we were clawing at, everybody else had looked through his financial disclosure. Everybody else had looked through the transcripts. And that wasn't the fault of it. We literally started, it was a running start. And we always joked that we were, bolting the wings on as we were taking off. And in many ways, we really, really were.
Sure. Real quick.
You said something that I think is really important, which is it wasn't a straight line.
Right.
He won because it wasn't a straight line.
Right.
He was a guy who was 3 years out of the Illinois State Senate, and we had to run the whole gauntlet, and people had to see him deal with adversity. I think this is true generally in presidential campaigns, but particularly if you're a young guy who's barely left a state legislature and you're asking to be president of the United States and you're running against an incredibly experienced opponent. When we had the crisis over Reverend Wright and he had to make that speech, which you were involved, I was a little bit involved, but he really wrote that speech, and half of it he wrote like in the middle of the night, hours before he gave the speech.
He stayed up 2 nights in a row till 3 a.m. working, and then he sent me track changes.
Yeah.
That's how he did it.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is
all
he did this at the end of a long campaign day, and he was under enormous pressure. There was a speculation that maybe the campaign would implode as a result of this.
He met with the editorial board that day, I think.
Well, that was at the Friday when this started. Yeah, when he said, "I want to make this speech by Tuesday." It's Friday, and he said, and no later than Tuesday. I don't want this to fester, and I need to write the speech. And I said, well, we got campaigning tomorrow. Tomorrow we're shooting ads on Sunday, all day in Pennsylvania on Monday. He said, no, don't worry about it. I know what I want to say. And he dictated an outline to you. But
Saturday night at 10 p.m.
Yeah, and then he,
So before we get to that, we're going to do questions here in about 10 minutes, so think of your questions. But John, there was another point, just fast forwarding. Really one of the key turning points in Iowa was the Jefferson-Jackson Day dinner, which was in November, I believe. He memorized that speech. Talk to us about moments that we didn't know at the time, about you working on that speech with him as he campaigned during the day.
So that speech was sort of the forcing mechanism for us to take his very unwieldy stump speech and cut it down into a 10-minute, very persuasive argument, because he had 10 minutes to give the speech. He couldn't read it off a prompter. He had to memorize it. And so all the problems
you should explain. The JJ dinner in Iowa is like the Roman Colosseum,
It literally was in the round.
It's in an arena, and each candidate gets 10 minutes. You can't use notes. You can't use a teleprompter. Your supporters are there. The other people's supporters are there. And it's a crazy scene. So, it's a pressure-filled.
A lot of high pressure. And all through the summer, like he'd gotten better around the 4th of July, but he was still giving these very long speeches, and I ended up going on the road to see some of them. And, we just started finding parts of the stump speech that were really good that I would then write down and try to give back to him. But it wasn't until right before the JJ that we sort of, I guess before the JJ there was the year out speech. We gave a speech that was, it's going to be a year until the general election. And there had been like so much agonizing over the JJ speech that we're like, we had a draft of the year out speech and we're like, let's just give this speech and see if this is a good test for the JJ speech.
So we were at Converse College, and I remember I was on the phone with you. And usually, I'd stand off to the side or in the back, and and I remember I said I found myself a seat in the middle of the auditorium, and we gave the Jefferson-Jackson speech,
It was a longer version. Then you called me that night. It was Saturday night. I was out. I was drinking, and you're like, "Hey, the speech went really well, and he's now on board with that being the bones of the JJ speech. So, but he wants a cut down version of it by tomorrow, so he can start practicing." So I put my drink down, and went home, and I stayed up all night.
Yeah.
And with Adam Frankel and Ben Rhodes, and we cranked out a draft of the speech, and then he had to practice it, including in like a motel in Iowa when he was just practicing to himself in a mirror in his own hotel room.
So
The thing about that speech was, I mean, and you know, it isn't all about tactics. The reason that this worked at the end of the day was because the message was the right message, and he was the right messenger of this message. There was a tremendous amount of jaundice about politics in Washington then, as there is now. But the war was raging, the war that he had opposed. There was tremendous battles between Republicans and Democrats. Nothing was getting done. The big issues were being ignored. And he was really waging an assault. I mean, Hillary Clinton became the exemplar of kind of incumbent Washington, but he was really waging a battle against the prevailing politics of Washington. And in the JJ dinner, we were able to boil down that assault in a really, really powerful way. With, by the way, Hillary Clinton and all the other candidates sitting there next to him, watching him deliver.
But Jeff, one
other candidate, though, really quickly, we haven't talked about is John Edwards. So, Pluff, I want to ask you about John Edwards. What was his importance?
Axe's former boss,
right?
John Edwards.
What was his importance to Senator Obama winning Iowa? He stayed in the race when there were some questions in the fall, and he ended up winning second place.
Well, I would say by the
that.
end of the Iowa caucuses, we were as concerned about Edwards as we were Hillary, because Edwards was competing for a lot of the same voters. I remember sitting in the Iowa campaign office. So in Iowa, you rank everybody. This is not just an Iowa thing, but a 1 is someone who's definitely going to caucus for you and is definitely going. And like the 2s are the people who are maybe going to vote for you, but you're not sure. And I called like 6 in a row that the campaign staff gave me that were all deciding between Edwards and Obama, and they all were going Edwards. And even though I know that was like anecdotal and not David, it freaked me out. So Edwards was moving at the end, and he was the change candidate. But listen, I think had Edwards not been in the race, I think we would have done even better in Iowa. I think he probably hurt us a little bit in South Carolina, which is hard to say because we won up by almost 40 points. Right. The crazy thing about Edwards, when I flew into O'Hare last night, I remember being in the cab line in O'Hare. No Ubers or Lyfts back then. In 2008, this was after Edwards dropped out, and talking to Senator Obama saying, Edwards wants to endorse me, but he wants to be promised either VP or Attorney General.
Yeah.
In the cab, I'm like, he wants what? And that's before we knew all of his, shall we say, bad choices he made in his life. So Edwards was a factor. There's no question. And he had a good organization in Iowa. I mean, David worked for him in 2004. He knew the state. Edwards. He had hired good people, and he had some momentum at the end. So I remember like some of our attacks, if you want to call them that, in the last week or 10 days were aimed at Edwards. Remember he had this, I forget who it was, one of his big donors, Bunny Mellon or something, was funding like millions of dollars in ads. We're attacking Edwards for being a fraud, but because we saw it in our data. I mean, Hillary was kind of staying where she was, and it was robust. But Edwards was moving, and a lot of people who were deciding at the end about who to caucus for were deciding between those 2 candidates.
And obviously the long march to, I want to ask Alyssa one fast thing. The long march to the nomination and then the presidency. Alyssa, when did you, what did you see in him? Because you had been observing him for years, and you had the experience of previous campaigns. When did you think that he could do it? Or were you worried at some point when donors were freaking out, to borrow a phrase, bedwetting? What did you see inside the room?
Well, the one thing I think that always kind of kept me thinking he could do it was like, you know, Favreau and I have known each other since the day Favreau graduated college. And it was because we were on the Kerry campaign together. And I think that the thing that we always saw in the Kerry campaign is that if something went bad, people blamed each other. If something went bad, John Kerry would blame us. And I think that we just never did that, right? Like, we never turned on each other. We were never unkind to each other. And I think that came from the top, right? Like, Barack Obama would not have abided that. And so I think that I always had the faith. I think I mean, honestly, I think I was always in the headquarters, so I think it was harder for me. I think you go on the road and you see things and it's exciting. I think that being in the headquarters and watching cable news all day, you're like, wow, we're gonna die. But I think it was the JJ. I think the JJ for me was like, he really seemed like he had his mojo back. He seemed like he got it at the moment that he needed it, and then, you know, and then we won Iowa.
Jeff, Axe said this earlier, that Barack had this ability to meet the moment, right? You always felt like if you needed a free throw with 3 seconds left, he was going to be really, really good. And he understood how important the JJ was and how this was going to be a defining moment. And to John's point, when he did the speech in South Carolina, he read it and he loved it and the reaction was good. But now came the hard part. You have to memorize it. And I remember, so we always stayed in the Hampton Inn by the airport in Des Moines. And they always put him on the end, which that's where the Secret Service can get somebody out if they need to. And we're on the second floor, and I remember walking by his room. You'll probably remember this, Reggie. I remember walking by his room, and the TV is, I feel like I'm in my grandmother's house. I mean, the TV was on like 12. It was blaring. And I looked at the guy, this giant Secret Service guy, machine gun next to the door, and I'm like, Jesus, what? You should just tell him to turn that down. I can hear it in the hallway. What in the world's going on? And it didn't dawn on me at all. And then the morning before the JJ, he does the speech in front of us in a conference room at the bottom of the Hampton Inn, and we're all blown away because we're like hoping he's been doing this. But again, you got to go, hey, you got 7 stops today, you got to do this stuff, and oh, by the way, when you least want to do it, you got to go memorize this speech. And I realized at that moment after he was giving that speech, I'm like, it was loud because he had the TV up and he was doing the speech. And he was in that room practicing. And I thought, God, he's just listening to basketball really, really loud. And I can't imagine to myself, like, how do you have that on the background while you're in the mirror giving the speech that you're trying to remember? And again, he had that ability to meet the moment when you knew he had to have the shot.
It was a little unnerving when he inserted "good and it counts" in his speech. We ought to get to
Let's take some questions here. The first couple from students, please.
We actually have our first question from YouTube.
Okay.
So
nice.
feel free
YouTube.
to line up and ask your question. The first question comes from Xavier Owens. Question for anyone. How did you overcome those moments when you just wanted to flat out walk away?
I don't think
I
anybody
never
ever
wanted to walk away.
Yeah.
No.
We had leases. No, I'm just kidding.
Marvin.
Yeah.
Were you more worried about him walking away at any point?
No. No. I mean, that was, as Alyssa said, it was a joy to work with these folks and everybody else. I mean, it was a real pleasure. We were there for a mission and a reason. He eventually found his stride as a candidate, which was really inspiring to see. But no, there were challenges. I mean, for me, I think the night we lost the New Hampshire primary was really tough because Hillary Clinton was back to being the front runner. I remember him the next day, we were in Boston for a fundraiser. He's like, you know, I actually think this is for the best.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clock him.
Yeah.
But he was right.
No, but he was,
because people weren't ready to give him the nomination yet, and he had to fight for it. So we had moments of setback, but I think we all just rallied together, and to know that you had millions of people out there who were putting their life into this campaign, like there was never a moment where you could really say, woe is us.
No.
Because all these people were giving their time and their energy and their money, and that would, on great days, it was an amazing thing, but on tough days, and that mattered to him, by the way. He would say, I don't want to let my volunteers down.
So that thing when he lost the New Hampshire primary.
We lost
you
the
remember
New Hampshire
this?
primary.
Yes. Yeah, as he reminded us. So when we lost the New Hampshire primary,
just to be clear,
we had a speech written. Yeah.
But the three of us had to knock on his door. He hated to watch return, so he's in his room with Michelle eating dinner. The three of us knock on our door. We look like we look glum.
Ashen.
Yeah. Sir,
We can picture it, yeah.
You're going to lose the New Hampshire primary.
No. We said, can we speak to you in the hall?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So he took that as a sign of something, and he came out and we talked. But my point is, he gave the speech he was going to give. with a few minor changes.
Well,
I think the reason he could do
had one line.
that is because when Ben Rhodes and I were working on that speech the night before, we were driving from Manchester to Concord, and he called us in the car and he said, "Hey, I've seen the draft of the speech. I think it's good, but it feels a little too triumphant. And I want people to understand that even if we win New Hampshire, and even if we win the nomination, it's going to be unbelievably hard. That even if we win the campaign, the presidency is going to be hard. And I need this sense of mission in the speech, and this sense of how, every time in our country when we've faced great challenges, we've really had to pull together to overcome them. And so I want that in the speech. And so because we put that into the speech, that's when we did the yes, the yes, we can.
That and what David said, the way he reacted the next day was another one of those tests where people were looking at him and saying, well, he's been knocked down, how's he going to handle that? And the way he handled it was one of those tests that gave people a sense that maybe he has the mettle to handle this. Anyway, I'm sorry.
We added one line.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Rohil. I'm a first year in the college. Thank you so much for being here. You guys are inspiration to all of us. So my question is, so after you guys had locked up the nomination, what was the sense in the campaign like when you're going into the general election? Like, was it confidence? Was it like kind of like celebratory in terms of looking back? Like, what was the sense either individually or just in the whole campaign?
Why don't you take that, Pluff?
We didn't do really much celebration at all.
None.
I mean, so John McCain was our opponent. So he'd clinched his nomination 3 months before luckily he squandered those 3 months, but we didn't know the degree to that. And John McCain was the Republican Democrats always feared. So we knew that Bush was weak. We knew that Bush was unpopular. But here you had John McCain, who might be out of central casting, their best nominee, and an untested African-American candidate who he needed to heal the party. So it really wasn't until deep into the fall when the economic collapse really intensified that you got a sense that if we landed the plane, we were going to be okay. But to the bedwetting point, I mean, I'd say in early September, most political observers thought we were going to lose.
Yeah.
And so we didn't think that. We thought we were going to win, a closer race than it ended up being. But no, I think, and listen, Barack Obama was very good about that. He'd say, okay, now that we've won the nomination, the only thing that matters is not patting ourselves on the back, is we can't screw it up.
Now let's go to Europe.
That's the thing. We should point out, so we decided to get on the high wire that we were running against McCain, foreign policy, national security guy. We're going to take a tour of Europe. And
the Middle East.
And the Middle East. And Alyssa planned that. And you talk about opportunities to screw up. And it was remarkable. And then we had 250,000 people at the Tiergarten in Berlin waiting for him. I mean, it was really an incredible
And just
thing.
to be clear, how much we put ourselves on the high wire, I think we taped Meet the Press with Tom Brokaw was the last thing we did. And I remember thinking, and he was telling us, like, so guys, when you were thinking about the schedule, and we did really 9 good days.
We did 37 stops in Israel.
Whose idea was it to put Meet the Press at the very end so that if we screwed it up, everybody would remember that? Let's get back to prep, boss. Let's.
Reggie, if I could ask you just a fast thing here about the difference in the general. You saw him throughout. How was he as a person, as a competitor, starting the general versus on this day 15 years ago? What had changed in him?
Look, I think the guy competed the whole race. I think how he was able to take constructive criticism evolved, and I think the team around him did a great job helping to sort of hone a process that not many people were familiar with, right? I mean, I actually think about it. One of the points that you made was that this thing's really hard and it's really complicated, but for me, Barack Obama had never run for president. I'd never worked on a presidential campaign. I don't actually think people knew, I didn't know, and I don't think he knew, like, how tough it was going to be. But I do think in seeing how challenging it was, to David's point and to Robert's point, he always rose to the occasion. But I don't think that it was ever about him. And I remember when you were talking about the financial crisis, and it was like, it seemed like we were headed in a good direction to win the election. And I had said to him, because he'd spent all week, he'd been calling President Bush all week trying to get TARP passed. And I said to him, I said, well, I don't know, like if you were president and the Republicans were in control of the Senate, I don't think they would lift a fucking finger to help you.
Foreshadowing.
And I think that it would be better.
That was prescient, Reggie.
Huh?
Yeah, it was.
And I said to him, I
What'd he
said, well,
say?
and I said to him, I said, I think it would be better for your campaign. Wouldn't it be better for your campaign if, things just get out of control? And he said, well, look, Reggie, I think you ask a really good question. I mean, kind of in a condescending way. and
We all got it.
And he said, I'd rather do the right thing, which is all the people who would be affected by this economic shock are none of the people who caused it. And if for some reason it cost me my presidency, I think it would be worth it. It's the right thing to do. And so he never, at any point in time, was like, oh my God, I have to do this. This is for me. He was like, I just want to be the best leader and have the most amount of impact on the American people that do it throughout the entire process.
A good reminder that a campaign that started with war anxiety ended on an entirely different matter.
Yeah.
And he became the person who voters saw as the antidote to that. Let's go to another question here.
Hi, my name is Eleanor. I'm a third year in the college. Thank you all so much for being here today. My introduction to politics was actually knocking on doors for the campaign at age 7. So I'm really excited you all are here. And my question is for Reggie. I'm just curious which campaign event had the most intense pre-game basketball match associated with it.
Well, one, I think the biggest challenge that we learned is that we did not win New Hampshire. We did not play a basketball game on the New Hampshire primary day. But I would say the best game probably was in Texas, and we didn't have a small staff, and we had to beg Secret Service to let us use a couple of guys to get the right amount of numbers. And then after the game, the shift agent said to me, he said, we're never going to do that again. Just so you know. If one of my
Reggie,
guys...
do you remember when I almost broke his nose before the debate in Philadelphia?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were playing a little pickup game, and he was, needless to say, quicker than I. And he goes by, and I rake him across the nose, and he goes down 3 hours before the debate. I think I've broken the nose of the candidate, and the Secret Service rushes in to see how he is and everything. Luckily, he got up, and he was serviceable.
Feels like he took out some of that frustration on you on the debate stage. That was pretty hot that night, if I remember.
We'll get to that in the next episode. Let's keep going with our questions here.
Hey, thanks for being here. My name is Shivam. I'm a third-year medical student at the Pritzker School of Medicine. What I wanted to know is, since the Obama campaign in 2007 to 2008, there's been a lot of talk about the next Obama. In the next big campaign. And I remember in the 2020 cycle when Kamala Harris had her announcement, there was a huge crowd and there was a lot of excitement, and ultimately that campaign fizzled out. And basically all of the next Obamas have fizzled out. So what's going wrong with the campaigns of these, that start exciting, that start with a lot of energy, that the media hypes up, and then all of a sudden they're just not able to live up to what you guys were able to do? What's going wrong with these campaigns, and how can we fix that going forward?
The biggest mistake you can make in politics is sit on the back of the truck and look backward and say, this worked before, this is going to work again. Barack Obama was a unique candidate at a specific period in our history, and someone else is going to come along and is going to have extraordinary qualities and will meet the moment, but they may be slightly different qualities, and it may be that the market is demanding something slightly different. So it's a big mistake for people to say, hey, I'm going to be the next Barack Obama. There's not going to be another Barack Obama, but there'll be someone great at some point, and the best thing is to root it in who you are. That message that we built was not synthetic. It was organic to who he was and what he believed. And therefore, he was a persuasive deliverer of that message. He was powerful in delivering that message. And that's what you need. Authenticity is the leading indicator in presidential races, and he had it. And someone trying to be him is not going to have it.
But I would also say, too, when he says authenticity, it means the experiences that you guys are having right now as you're in communities, as you're in your careers, as you guys are seeing what people are actually dealing with. And in those experiences, you then can create a message that is authentic and actually resonates with people because, you've been amongst them.
And I would just say too, I mean, I think Alyssa said it a little bit, David said it. There was a sense of mission in all of this and a real sense of team. And if somebody needed a hand up and needed some help because they were overwhelmed or something hadn't gone well, that everybody rallied. And to Alyssa's point, like a lot of Washington-based campaigns, right? Something goes wrong and like everyone's updating their resume. They're talking about what other
reporters.
And there was just never any of that. And I think you said it, Paul. There were moments in which he carried us, and there were moments in which we carried him. And in reality, I think it isn't about a great announcement, even though that's what's brought us here. It is 10,000 things over the course of 18 months, not all of which are going to go perfectly right. Not all of them are even going to go well. It's just, are you going to get up and do the next event better than that last event? Are you going to just add to it and keep going? And we had that sense of mission that, quite frankly, I don't think we would. Our theory was, let's not let each other fail. And I think that, and I mean, part of it was too.
The strategy from the beginning, though, talk about that. I mean, that was critical by deciding that first flight to Cedar Rapids back 15 years ago today was no accident. You designed the campaign thinking he had to win Iowa to have a choice.
We had to disrupt the front runner.
Chance, yeah.
Right.
And if we didn't disrupt the front runner in the first race, he'd be a nice footnote in history. I will say this, though, and this is not meant to disparage other candidates, but I think this to be true. The one thing that's been missing in everybody is Barack Obama, when he thought about his campaign, when he still thinks about it today or talks about it, he thinks about all of you, the people. So to him, the campaign was the volunteers and organizers. And I think a lot of people say that they want to have that at the heart of their campaign, but they don't really believe it. It's not in their DNA. And so that is the thing I think that cannot be faked. I think people got it. They thought that Barack Obama thought that they were the most important people in the campaign because he did.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is a special sauce. By the way, Trump has it in a completely different way. I mean, I don't think he really cares about his people, right? But they care about him, and that's why he keeps exceeding people's expectations of what he's going to do, particularly in these rural and exurban areas.
Yeah.
But Obama had that. It was innate to him, and I think that is, I can't tell you how many candidates, it's a little less now, but certainly in 10, 12, 14, 16, I want to run a grassroots campaign. You can't want to run a grassroots campaign. Like, that's like color, and so you can't manufacture it.
There's also, from a message standpoint, it wasn't just that he cared about that, about people. It was based on a premise that was in everything he said, which was, we the people actually have the power if we come together to bring about change. Yeah. I mean, that was the premise of the campaign.
I mean, it's from his background as an organizer. That's what he genuinely believes about politics. That is his philosophy of democracy. And it's like to his core.
Right.
Let's keep trying to go with a couple questions here. Shorter answers here for the next few.
Hey, I'm Jacob. I'm a first year in the college. My question is, if you're a young person who wants to be successful in something like political speech writing or running a campaign, what do you have to do?
John.
Yeah, so I always tell people to jump on a campaign because I think that campaigns are the closest thing to like a true meritocracy in politics. I think, and look, there's plenty of great jobs on the Hill or in think tanks or in other organizations, but the only reason that I ever got a chance to be a speechwriter is because, so I was a press assistant on John Kerry's campaign. I was this guy's assistant, getting him coffee all the time. And I sat next to the chief speechwriter, and I remember, like, I turned to him one day and I was like, they needed a deputy speechwriter. I said, can I be your deputy? And he said, no, absolutely not. You don't have the experience, you're 22, that's crazy. And then a little while later, when John Kerry's campaign was sort of falling apart and Howard Dean was beating us and John Kerry mortgages his house and, we don't have any money. And they're like, well, we still need a deputy speechwriter and we don't know who to hire because no one's going to join the sinking ship. And then they looked at me and they're like, well, okay, well, you can take the job and we're not going to be around much.
You would have been great on the Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. So I got the chance because I was there and I worked hard, and a campaign is always short-staffed, they're always short on money, and so it is the best place for you to really prove yourself, and it's just the most fun. It's like the closest thing to an extension of college. being on a campaign. So.
That's one more question.
All right, hi, my name is Tara. I'm a first-year MPP student at the Harris School of Public Policy, and my first meaningful campaign experience was Obama's '08 campaign. I was in high school, not old enough to vote, and I was in Columbus, Ohio, so it was amazing. I had the best time, and so I'm freaking out. I'm so excited to see all of you and hear from you. My question is, you all mentioned a lot about the risks that you took going onto this campaign and going up against major campaign operatives that have been around forever. What was the thing about Barack Obama's candidacy that really inspired you or persuaded you to take the leap of faith and join the campaign?
Well, he had been a friend of mine. In fact, my friend Betty Lou Saltzman is here, who introduced me to Barack Obama in 1992 and told me he was going to be the first black president. So if you need any race tips. but he, look, the world of politics sorts out into two categories of people. There are the people who run for office because they want to be something, and the people who run for office because they want to do something. When I met Barack, and that's the admirable cohort, when I met Barack Obama, he had been president of the Harvard Law Review. He could have written his ticket at any law firm or corporation in America and set himself up for life, and instead he came back here to work in a small civil rights firm to teach, and he ultimately ran for office. And he explained to me, I want to be about something larger than myself. And the values that he expressed to me in our first conversation were the values I sought throughout our relationship. And then when you work for a guy like that, if you really believe that politics means something, it's very energizing. And he never disappointed me in that way. And he inspired me. I think I told you guys earlier today, I always say I like him so much because he listened to me so little. He never was interested in the sort of political argument, especially on big policy questions. So it was a joy. And I don't mean to speak for everybody, but given the fact that the clock's going down and I've talked so long, I probably have. But I don't know that I think everybody feels that way.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Let's just finish up with these two questions here.
Hello, my name is Abby. I'm a first year into college. And after reminiscing about the great and the not so great moments of this campaign, were there any parts that you would have changed or improved upon, such as like almost breaking your candidate's nose?
Yeah, that's a definite.
How about you take that, Pluff? What would
Well,
you have
so
changed?
many. I mean, in the scheme of things, you win, so everything looks like you're a genius. But you made a lot of mistakes along the way. We made mistakes heading into the New Hampshire primary. We made mistakes in the big critical day where Texas and Ohio happened that extended our primary. I thought actually in the general election we excelled. There's not many mistakes I think we made in the general election. Other than we should have asked for a recount in Missouri because we would have won.
Stop it, Bluff.
Still looking for those.
But in the primary, lots of mistakes, right? But every time we made a mistake, whether at the organizational level, at the candidate level, again, we were reminded that there were so many people counting on us who were on this journey with us. And that was the other thing in terms of him, the prior question. He's a good person, a sane person, by the way, still sane today. And I've worked in a lot of organizations for people, and there's plenty of people who yell and scream or be successful, but most of them flame out. He's just a normal human being. Okay, who doesn't sweat little stuff ever, and that's good. But also to be part of a campaign that, again, most of us didn't think would win, but that was at its core inviting the American people to be part of it. Like, if you can't get excited about that, you should have never gotten in the business in the first place. And so I think we made a bunch of tactical mistakes, but I think we got the big things right: electoral strategy, primary strategy. And then really by the general election, he was one of the best candidates in American political history. So, I think we played a strong general election.
You made a joke about this, but it's an important moment. In New Hampshire, we come in, we leave Iowa, we're all excited, we've won, and we land in New Hampshire, and there's no doubt about it, we took our foot off the gas. We were doing town hall meetings.
We arrived like a conquering army.
Right, we were doing town hall meetings, we were taking questions, we were interacting, and we took our foot off the gas and we just did stump speech.
But voters have a way of, this process is about voters after all. And I remember in New Hampshire, a lot of voters wanted, they wanted to keep taking their measure of
yes.
it.
Well, I was going to say,
we can talk about the, the emotional moment in the diner, et cetera. But
Hillary Clinton, yes.
Right,
no, but
sure.
I mean, again, the mistake led though to, as much as he said that to Pluff, and I was there too, and I was like, Yeah, walk me through how this is a good thing, sir.
But voters weren't done with the primary.
Right, but that tactical mistake in the 5 days that led up to it made him a better candidate and made him able to withstand the real lows that he would encounter in the next 4 or 5 months.
I think it's about, for most of the mistakes, I think it was never like we made the same mistake. Oh, we made a lot of mistakes, but they were all new.
The one thing I'd say too, because this is important though, every time, and I'd say during this happened in the White House too in 2012, but in 07 or 08, there's 3 or 4 times where things weren't going well. And we'd be summoned to like a Sunday night meeting.
Without food.
Always eager to sit there. But every time, he'd start the meeting with his legal pad and say, okay, we're clearly not doing well. I'm going to start with all the things I'm not doing well.
Right.
And when the leader of an organization does that, it opens everybody up to be more open and vulnerable and honest. It's really impressive.
His list was always shorter than the things we were screwing up.
Yes, that's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. One final question here. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, everybody. I'm Phil, just a visitor. Thanks for great campus, great IOP is terrific. Big fan of the Hacks on Tap and the pod. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, really. Thanks for the merch. Please tell Murphy I said thanks. Could you talk about something that maybe seems insignificant, but to my view is to a lot of people who followed in 2008? That's the creation of the logo.
Oh, my.
Mr. Obama's impression of the logo. And then specifically the Hope and Change artist posters that were so popular at the time.
Colin, is that you? Yeah. Colin Carter, who's a longtime collaborator of mine, an editor and extraordinary editor. I went to him and his shop, and I told them that I wanted a logo that was, I showed them a button that Harold Washington, when he ran for mayor of Chicago, used. And it showed like a sunrise. And it really spoke to renewal, a new day. And I said, I want to take that theme. And these guys created what became a very famous logo. But you were there, I think. We were when we were working on the announcement speech. I show him the logo, which I really loved. And he said, that's terrible. It's too corporate. He said, but I guess we don't have time to change it, so we'll use it. The logo is now the official logo of the Obama Foundation. And so he came to like it. And it became, an iconic logo, and it had a message to it. Yeah. So we designed it with a message in mind. This was a new day. This was a new beginning for the country. And he also didn't like Yes We Can, but that's a whole nother story.
But I think also the existence of, whether it was the posters themselves, I think it was the spirit of it. And John talks about the us, not me in the announcement speech. The other thing about the announcement speech, and I think this is really important for how this carried, and it started when he ran for the Senate. It was in the 2004 convention speech. It wasn't just a list of all the things that were terrible or going wrong. And you can't create a movement by walking into a room and saying, I just want to go through, here are the 10 things we suck at. You have to give people this idea of there's better days ahead. If we all work together, we can get there and then make big change.
And since this is about that day 15 years ago, if we could close with the clip, and then I'll ask a very fast question about this. This is another moment from the speech. Let's listen.
Calling and see as I see the future of endless possibilities stretching out before us. If you sense as I sense that the time is now to shake off our slumber and slough off our fears and make good on the debt we owe past and future generations, then I am ready to take up the cause and march with you and work with you. Today, together, we can finish the work that needs to be done and usher in a new birth of freedom on this earth. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's get to work.
So, of course, is one thing that Senator Obama, then President Obama, always said, as John knows, the work is not done. The arc of the moral universe is strong, but it bends towards justice.
You've heard that
about a lot. But Pluv, since you came in late, I want to close with a question to you. Obviously, the legacy of the president will be studied for some time to come. But as we are here in this current moment, you mentioned former President Donald Trump and some similarities. What is the correlation between the Obama legacy and the Trump legacy? Did Barack Obama usher in Donald Trump? And what is next in the future in your eyes?
I mean, I don't think anyone can really have the answer to that question. I would say this: Trump was not an original actor. He built on decades. I mean, where did President Reagan begin his 1980 campaign? Philadelphia, Mississippi. Richard Nixon, Ehrlichman, Haldeman were very clear that they wanted to basically go after black people. They couldn't do it through laws anymore. They would do it through drug wars. So Trump, I think, built on, maybe perfected, the politics of division and hate. I still think, listen, when we were in the campaign, I don't think any of us, I don't remember having a conversation with any of you about the history we were going to make. It was clear that we were just trying to win the presidency. And even though we won in 2008 by a good margin, fueled by the economic collapse, I think, in his handling of it, and 2012 was a tough race, I still think it's remarkable that America elected a black president, okay, given what we're going through now, particularly re-elected one. I remember, this is right before the election, Reggie, you might have been there, so I won't name the friends, but we were at a campaign event in 2012, backstage, and one of Barack's friends said, you know, as great a job as you're doing, I can't believe you're not getting 80% of the vote. And he looked at me knowing this would get under my skin and says, yeah, Pluff, why am I not getting 80% of the vote? And I said, I can assure all of you, he's getting every single fucking vote a black man in America presiding over a recession can get, okay? This is still a really tough country. But I still bet on the optimistic side of America. I think that I'm not, convinced we're going to make it through, but I think what he appealed to, and you saw
What's
that.
the pessimistic side?
Well, no, but I still believe that the pro-democracy, pro-progress side of America, it's going to be a tougher fight. It should be, is going to win out. But even if you look at some of those Trump-Obama voters, and there was more of them than I think any of us realized, they both felt, they thought Barack Obama, the black candidate from Chicago, they lived in rural Missouri or rural Indiana or rural North Carolina, understood them because he did, to your point. He had lived that life. So I don't think he ushered it in. I think it's a remarkable period in America that you had Obama to Trump. There's no question about that. Yeah. But even Bush Obama to Trump. But I think for some people, his election unleashed, I think, people's willingness to be more open with their bigotry and more open with their belief that it's too soon to have this kind of change. And it didn't prevent us from winning in 2008 or 2012, more importantly, the great work he did as president. But I think, listen, I'm still amazed that, if you turn on Fox at night, particularly Carlson, somewhat Ingram, they're openly talking about white replacement theory. So the mainstreaming and mainlining of this hatred is something we all have to fight back against. I don't think Barack Obama was the cause of that, but it might have been an accelerant. But
it wasn't just that he was. Obviously, race is central, as it has been through the history of our politics. We saw that at the Sarah Palin rallies, we saw the leading edge of what we would see. But he also represented the face of a changing country. It wasn't just that he was black, but he, how he carried himself and and I think that, for people who are threatened by that change, it was galvanizing. And we have to acknowledge that we all played down the notion that, well, there's race involved and so on, because it wasn't to our political advantage to complain about it. But he was the face of change. And honestly, if you look at the demographic trends of this country, that will ultimately be the future. But that is what's made the resistance more and more determined and open to demagogues to capitalize on.
Right. And I would also say, for the students in the room, Barack Obama would make this point all the time, that democracy isn't static. As we've articulated on the stage, we got a lot of stuff wrong. So there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of room for people to use their voice, use their influence, use the position that they have in the world to go out there and make our democracy continue to be strong. And so, we all have to play a part of that and know that even when it's
feels really dark, that there's opportunity out there for us to be better as a country.
Well, he'd always talk about the arc and how it bends towards justice, but then he would always add at the end, but it doesn't bend that way on its own. It bends that way because we put our hands on it and we bend it ourselves. And so just that's the thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you finished with that line.
You know, he did 1,000 million times.
It worked for him.
Yeah.
And now that we've gone over our time, thank you very much for your patience and indulgence, and thank you to all for thinking back about that.
Bend our